Social democracy and democratic socialism is a lie. The revolutionary potential and potential for the working classes to take true political power and achieve independence via these means has proven to be impossible. The historical failures of reforming capitalism in order to achieve socialism are innumerable, but yet there still seems to be a belief even within the radical left community that bourgeois democracy will be able to achieve a socialist society. For those who have become well versed in Marxism-Leninism and the Juche idea, the bourgeois democratic route to socialism should have been discarded a long time ago. However, it's apparent that a number of self-styled Marxists still harbour delusions in this regard. It's the aim of this video to showcase Juche's relation and position on social democracy. However, it's important to first clarify the limitations of social democracy through the lens of the preceding working class theory, Marxism-Leninism. The viewer should also take note that a lot of the following ideas have been paraphrased from the works of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, especially Socialism as a Science by the latter. Marxism established the general rules of dialectical materialism and therefore arms us with the ability to analyse the bourgeois classes from the scope of objectivity. Bourgeois society is a society based on the private ownership of the means of production. The bourgeois state therefore enshrines the protection of private property as an important duty. Because of this, the bourgeois state is the state of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, or rather, of capital. Within the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, it is of course the bourgeois classes who reign supreme, and it is with their influence upon society as a whole that politics and economics is conducted. Social democracy and democratic socialism operates within the framework of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and therefore ultimately is answerable not to the proletariat, but to the bourgeois classes. It is within this fact, therefore, that the historical limitations of social democracy make themselves clear. Social democracy rejects a scientific understanding of the world and instead takes a utopian approach to politics, because, by its very nature, it depends upon the goodwill of the bourgeois classes. Kim Jong-il said that to do this is to make a mess of the revolution. Relying upon the goodwill of the bourgeoisie is in the long term only going to impede the establishment of socialism. The bourgeoisie will never willingly give away their political and economic power so eagerly, and therefore we must take the approach that the exploiting classes will only give away such power if they can see a necessary reason to do so. If the bourgeois classes agree to distribute their wealth through the means of heavier taxation and social welfare, then it should be understood that this concession is carried out not to give the masses more power, but rather to allow the bourgeoisie to retain their own. Not conceding to the social democratic demands in the beginning could cause more revolutionary ideas to take a hold. However, on the other hand, the bourgeoisie will go to the extreme lengths to keep their power and status. Therefore, the social democratic parties can only operate within a limited framework. This framework is the framework of social usefulness. If the social democratic reforms help to nullify anti-bourgeois sentiment and pro-working class power ideals, while at the same time cause the least amount of damage to the power of the exploiter classes, then it is certain that such bourgeois democratic reforms will be accepted. Once the limits of usefulness of social democracy has been reached, the Social Democrats' power will be severely curbed. If these Social Democrats attempt to fight back against the bourgeoisie, then the bourgeois classes will fight back even harder and will go to the most extreme lengths to wipe out the Social Democrats. A prime example of this can be observed in Venezuela today. For the first few years of Comrade Hugo Chávez's presidency, his government went relatively unobstructed, as his reforms helped to soothe the antagonisms between the popular masses and the exploiter classes. Once Chávez began to seriously threaten the power of the exploiter classes began all-out war to bring the Bolivarian revolution to its knees. This war has gone on until today, and it's thanks only to the PSUV's development and radicalization of the working masses that they have been able to stay in power. However, economic and political turmoil which exists in Venezuela today can be boiled down to the expectation of goodwill from the Venezuelan national bourgeoisie and of the foreign imperialists. Thanks to the PSUV's shift to a more truly revolutionary line, they have been able to fight back against the bourgeoisie. However, some others were not so lucky. Comrade Salvador Allende, a genuinely Marxist president of Chile, was overthrown by Pinochet under the orders of the bourgeoisie and the imperialists. Comrade Allende posed a serious threat to the capitalist classes, and because he showed no signs of conceding to the bourgeoisie, he was ousted. Because Allende operated within the bourgeois democratic framework, he was powerless to shut down the supporters of the capitalist classes, in fear of being labelled an usurper of power and a dictator. These are two rather extreme examples, and in the long run, the vast majority of social democrats will eagerly concede to the capitalist classes, and all of their reforms will be destroyed or heavily distorted. Within the scope of the First and Third World, we can see clearly that the vast majority of First World imperialist nations are social democratic, especially in Europe. The function of social democracy in the First World is to mainly keep the capitalist classes' powers truly unchecked, but also to keep the very imperialist world order unopposed. Within the social democratic parties of the First World, there may be token anti-imperialism, especially against military interventionism. However, they again rely on the goodwill of the bourgeoisie to see the moral degeneracy of their actions and fail, or ignore, the intrinsic requirement of imperialism to crush the dissent and anti-imperialism that exists within the world imperialist order. The utopian socialists seriously fail to provide an analysis of the bourgeoisie and its functions. Within the First World, even social conservative parties see the necessity to keep some form of social welfare to keep the masses placated. Even those who have been pushed away by society can still see the supposed merits of relying on a social democratic party to help them in their struggles. In conclusion, social democracy is a mainstay of the First World as insurance against anti-imperialist sentiment from growing within the imperialist camp. Therefore, as already discussed in the beginning of this video, it is clear that the bourgeoisie see the merits of sharing some of their wealth in order to keep their greater criminality unopposed. Finally, as a general critique of social democracy, we can say that many on the left will claim that supporting social democracy, such as Bernie Sanders in the United States and Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom, will help to bring socialist ideals to the masses and will allow us to supposedly pull these types of social democratic parties further to the left. First of all, it should be clear to the viewer already how this claim is a utopian idea. All the points made so far should elucidate the falseness of this claim. However, it is important to take this claim one step further and provide a deeper analysis and answer to it. The bourgeoisie will never willingly give away their power, and, as already discussed, the bourgeoisie will go to the most brutal extremes to bring down the reformists. However, within the First World, the social democratic parties have never pulled anything or been pulled ever to the left. Even now, with a number of social democratic parties in power in Europe, not one of them is or has ever implemented more radical reforms. And never has a communist or workers' party grown in power or influence thanks to the existence of a social democratic party being in power. Even one of history's most extreme social democrats, Clement Attlee, leader of the British Labour Party and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1945 to 1951, did nothing to help develop the influence of communist or workers' parties, and even him, who is considered to be a great hero among social democrats, ultimately was accountable to the bourgeoisie. The biggest and most glaring example of this is his decision to rearm the United Kingdom and assist the United States in its war against the Korean people. Attlee had no choice to do this, as he agreed to the Marshall Plan, essentially binding the United Kingdom to the new growing imperialist power, the United States. The imperialism of a united First World against the Third World. Also, the falsehood of the claim of pulling Social Democrats to the left can be proven false by the reaction of Social Democrats to their quote-unquote achievements. What is meant by this is that when a Social Democratic Party comes to power, they will implement their most popular policies, resulting in their supporters to claim they have achieved socialism. And this, in turn, will quieten them down. Therefore, it is clear that getting Social Democrats into power, such as Sanders or Corbyn, will not provide a base for bringing radical or more leftist ideas into the mainstream of politics, and that also staunch Social Democrats will denounce more leftist elements in the mistaken belief that they have achieved their goals of bringing about social democracy or so-called socialism. So far in this video, the question of social democracy has been approached from the materialist viewpoint. However, the Juche philosophy provides a fresh way of evaluating and critiquing social democracy. From the Juche viewpoint, the aforementioned criticisms are correct, and the analysis of social democracy from the stand of Marxist perceptions doesn't require much development in the scope of Juche, but rather Juche provides us with a new set of tools to critique the social democratic stand, much like how Marxism and Juche provide different philosophical answers to different questions. From the Juche viewpoint, as described by Comrade Kim Jong-il in Socialism is a Science, a society based on the private ownership of the means of production is a society based purely on individualism. This individualism is divorced from collectivism and as a result manifests itself as selfish greed. The law of the jungle outlook on society remains dominant. Under a genuinely socialist system, however, collectivism comes into play. Collectivism does not reject individualism as a human need. Kim Jong-il sums this up by stating that collectivism fulfills humanity's desire to form part of a social collective, whereas individualism is humanity's desire to be recognized as an equal member of the social collective. The individualism described by Kim Jong-il that exists under capitalism is divorced from collectivism and tramples upon the collectivist needs of humanity. This can be observed through the existence of deepening social alienation and the championing of competitiveness and outcompeting your rivals. From the viewpoint of collectivism and individualism, the faults of social democracy should be apparent to the viewer. Social democracy is a system operating within the framework of the private ownership of the means of production. This is, therefore, a society still based on individualism, and individualism which tramples on collectivism cannot exist and cannot ever be considered socialist. The shift from individualism to collectivism requires the popular masses to take control of the means of production and to eliminate, therefore, the oppression and exploitation of one over another. As previously discussed, this shift cannot be carried out by the means of reformism, as the bourgeoisie will not allow it. From the viewpoint of individualism and collectivism, they will not allow it thanks to their own selfish greed. Mankind has the essential attributes of independence, creativity, and consciousness. Mankind strive for independence, as understood in the Juche sense, is the strive to cast off the fetters of class and national subjugation. To achieve the total independence of humanity requires the popular masses to cast off class antagonisms. In order to achieve this, and the masses must form a people's government which represents the interests of the working masses. The working masses taking full control of the state and society is the only method which will guarantee the independence of humanity. Within the scope of social democracy and so-called democratic socialism, the establishment of a people's government is not the goal, and therefore achieving independence, an essential quality of mankind, is impossible. There may, of course, be some token lip service to the establishment of a so-called people's government, but we must take a scientific analysis of this. No matter how much social democrats and democratic socialists may wish for this to be true, it is in fact false. There may, of course, be some token lip service to the establishment of a so-called people's government, but we must take a scientific analysis of the veracity to this claim. No matter how much social democrats and democratic socialists may wish for this to be true, it is in fact false. The social democratic society is, as discussed, based on greed, individualism, and still under the control of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeois exploiting classes do not recognize the popular masses as anything other than a commodity whose labor power is to be bought and sold. The attitude towards the popular masses is inherently contradictory to the principles of independence being the attribute of mankind. Therefore, its existence within the bourgeois democratic framework is impossible for the exploiting classes. The exploiting classes will fight tooth and nail to eradicate any mainstream sentiment which seeks to establish true independence. As a result, no party political program of social democratic parties advocate for the establishment of such independence, because A, they do not believe that independence is a necessity of the popular masses, and B, even if they did, they would come under serious attack by the reactionary forces within society. So, how does independence and the establishment of collectivism and overall independence is an attribute of mankind. Mankind has a material being, but mankind also has a social and political integrity. Independence is the, quote, life and soul of mankind, as described by Comrade Kim Jong-il in On the Juche Idea. This life and soul is mankind's socio-political integrity. Developing one's socio-political integrity is what makes us a social being. To maintain one's socio-political integrity is an important feature of mankind. Socio-political integrity, as explained in Socialism is a Science, comes from the social collective. When one's social and political life is subordinated, one cannot lead an independent life. This subordination is through the means of exploitation and oppression. Individualism is based upon private ownership, and because this type of society creates class antagonisms, oppression and exploitation, it therefore can be concluded that achieving the socio-political integrity and therefore independence of the popular masses is impossible. Collectivism, i.e. the social collective, is what gives mankind their socio-political integrity. Only when one is loved and trusted by the social collective can mankind achieve their independence. And only by achieving a collectivist society can the factors which trample upon mankind's socio-political integrity, oppression and exploitation be abolished. Thus, it can be concluded that the only method to achieve independence for the popular masses is by the abolition of individualism, the seizing of the means of production, and the establishment of a collectivist society. Abolition of these cannot occur through the reformist path. Social democracy and so-called democratic socialism is a lie, a complete distraction created by the bourgeoisie to stop and impede the socialist revolution. It is only through revolution that true proletarian power can be created and can independence be achieved for the masses. Comrade Kim Jong-il said that social democracy is the surrender of the popular masses to imperialism. To accept the reformist route and to surrender to the bourgeois classes is to accept the exploitation and oppression of the working class. Despite their well-meaning rhetoric, modern social democrats such as Corbyn and Sanders are truly the tools of imperialism. Despite what they claim, their only worth in society is to soothe the contradictions of capitalism and to keep the power of the bourgeoisie in place. It is the duty of all communists, Marxist-Leninists and Juche idea supporters to reject the social democratic line, reject its subordination to imperialism, and to reject those who appropriate and give a bad name to the struggle for socialism. It is socialism, the society in which the popular masses are the masters of state and society, who have cast off the fetters of class and national subjugation, including subjugation of the masses by the bourgeois social democratic stooges. Forwards to the socialist revolution, forwards to the proletarian dictatorship, forwards to the independence of the popular masses. Thank you, comrades. Red salute.